How's it going, everyone? I'm JGeks, and this is my video on planetary materials in EVE Echoes for the month of October. All the graphs you'll see go over the total planetary materials mined, planetary material mines by output, as well as planetary materials by region. These graphs will give you a general idea of player counts in all these regions, as most players are going to be gathering planetary materials in the same region or at least near where they play at. So from this data that was given to me by the development team at NetEase, we're able to break it down and show you what's going on and where it's going on in New Eden. The first thing we'll look at is the total PI gathered planetary materials for the month of October in EVE Echoes. Precious alloys number 1, and it makes sense because it's used for all tier 7 and above ships, as well as all the faction ships. So all those ships require a lot of planetary materials to be built, and since precious alloys used in all of those higher tier ones, it's there at number 1. Opulent compound comes in second. Opulent compound is used for all tier 6 and above cruisers, and since those are one of the most popular ships to fly right now in the game for PvE content as well as large PvP battles, you see opulent compound there in second. Condensed alloy coming in third. Condensed alloy is used in all the faction ships as well as all the industrial ships. So condensed alloy sees a lot of uses. Noble metals, they're used for all Amar and Galenti ships, and since those are the drone ships, drones right now are one of the most meta weapon classes to be using. So noble metals there at number 4. Gleaming alloy, that's a good one. That's used for the other two factions. Lustering alloy, that's used for all tier 6 and below ships. And since a lot of people are still in those tiers or just using those ships because they don't cost as much, you see lustering alloy up there. Next up is glossy compound. Glossy compounds used for all the battle cruisers in the game, and you can see 1.45 billion units of glossy compound have been made so far through planetary mining. Sheen compound, another one just like noble metals that's used for all Amar and Galenti ships, is really high up there. And then heavy metals, the third component for all the Amar and Galenti ships. So as you can see, Amar and Galenti ships are the most popular planetary materials and ships to be flying right now. And mostly because those are the drone ships, like we said before. Drones right now are one of the most meta ships, where in the beginning of the game, you saw the Caracal and missile ships being the number 1. Most players have shifted to drone ships now, so that's just something to keep in mind. There's still a lot of people that use missiles, don't get me wrong, but drones is definitely the new meta over missiles. Next we get to reactive metals. Reactive metals is the first one not to peak over 1 billion units for the month of October, but it's still gathered a lot because one thing about reactive metals as well as toxic metals is their volume. For every 4 precious alloy you gather, you'd only be gathering 1 reactive metal. So this graph kind of shows them lower, but you'll see in the next graph when we break it down by volume that reactive metals is actually much higher than it looks on this graph. Fiber composite comes at 9.93 billion units. Fiber composite's used for all the frigates. So frigates are still, while they're not the best ships to be using when it comes to PvE, they're very commonly used in PvP because they're very cheap ships and they don't take a lot to build. And so they're a really good ship if you don't think you're going to make it back, or if you're a little tight on your money. Frigates are a good option to use because they're quick little ships, and a lot of times the bigger ships can't even hit them. It's what we call speed tanking in the game. So if you can get really close to those bigger ships at a high speed, you're able to just keep orbiting around them and not getting hit. So frigates still have a good place in this game. Heavy water, that's up there as the first fuel, and the only reason it's up so high is, once again, when we get to the volume, you'll see that heavy water is just, you gather it in bulk. As you would get like 1 precious alloy, it would be the same as getting 100 heavy water. So even though heavy water is up there at 0.73 billion units, it's not really being gathered that much. It just has a really high output. Motley compounds used for all the tier 4 and tier 5 ships crafting. There's still a lot of people in those lower tiers, and a lot of people, like we said with the frigates, a lot of people using those low tier ships just to have throwaway ships for PvP combat. They have a lot of uses, even though they're not the best for PvE. Crystal compounds up next. Crystal compound's going to be a big one here going forward because crystal compound is a component for all tier 8 and above ships in the game, as well as all the faction battleships. So crystal compound's definitely going to see a huge spike over the next month as one of the more favorable things to be gathering now that tier 8's in the game. Toxic metals, just like the reactive metals, is low in volume, so the position on the graph is a little bit deceiving at 0.51 billion units. But toxic metals, they're used for all the faction ships, as well as a lot of the industrial ships, if not all of them. Lucian compound. Lucian compound's only used for destroyers, the tier 6 and above destroyers. So now that the destroyers that can use the bubbles are in the game, you're seeing a lot more destroyers being built and used. But before that, destroyers were just kind of in that middle ground where they weren't as good as cruisers in PvE, and they really didn't have much uses outside of, say, like logistical purposes, like healing your teammates, things like that. But yeah, destroyers are just in a weird spot in the game right now. And so not a lot of Lucian compound being gathered because not too many people fly destroyers. Base metals suffer from the same issue as the toxic and reactive metals, low output, and it's used for all the tier 4 and tier 5 ships. Then we get to dark compound. Dark compound's used for all the higher tier drones, as well as a few of the modules. I'm not quite sure which modules, but it's used for those things. It's not really used in any ships or structures or things like that, but it's used for a lot of the components for the ships. Now that a lot of people are using the higher tier ships, expect dark compound to become more and more useful as people are trying to attach higher level drones, because it's only for drones, I think the MK7s and above use dark compound, as well as things like the covert op cloak. So that's where dark compound's at. And then we just get into all the construction components for structures and fuels. So you can see there, all of them are just around 0.2 to 0.03 billion units. And like we said, just not a lot of structures being built out there. And the ones that are, they really don't, compared to, say, like now, the new faction battleships that are in the game, those actually require a lot more materials than all the structural components, actually more so than the entire Capsuleer outpost itself. So that's why all the structures are so low, as well as the fuels. Fuels are really only used to power those Capsuleer outposts, as well as to power a lot of the group modules in the game. And right now, there's not too many people using those compared to all the other ships. So once more and more people use those Logi ships, as they would call them, to help repair group shields or group armor, then you'll start to see the fuel go up, as well as once more corporations have outposts up and running, those all require fuel to keep going. So throughout the game, you'll see all the fuel start to go up, but right now they're not in a really good spot and not a lot are being gathered. Now we'll take a look at the total PI gathered chart for the month of October in Eve Echoes, but this time it's based on volume. And like we were saying with the reactive metals, one reactive metal is the same as, say, 4 precious alloys. So that's why you can see how reactive metals have gone way up over precious alloy as the most common material gathered out there because of volume. So this is adjusting all of the values based on their actual outputs. So you have reactive metals as number 1, clear and far ahead. And that's just because reactive metals are used in all tier 6 and above ships. And most people in the game, once they hit tier 6, are going to be using those ships from here on out. Outside of a few circumstances. But yeah, that's why reactive metals are so far up there. Precious alloy, opulent compound, the rest kind of fall into place where they were before. The only ones that really have different outputs are some of the metals, as well as some of the fuels. As well as there are a couple structures. Let's if we can see on the list, I know silicate glass. Silicate glass is one that for every, say, 2 precious alloy you would be getting, you'd only be getting 1 silicate glass. But other than that, most things probably stay around where they were on the chart above. But that's what you're looking at here, is all of the percents of which materials are being gathered based on their volumes. The last chart we'll look at is the PI gathered by region for the month of October in Eve Echoes. When you break it down by region, I colorized it as blue and red. Red are the null-sec systems, and blue are the high and low-sec systems. So as you can see, Kyrios and Delve are the 2 top places to be gathering PI. Kyrios, as we found out in last video, that's where the Trimarch Alliance is at. And it's just a lot of players and a lot of corporations just packed tightly in one region. And so that's the reason you're seeing Kyrios so high on the list, is there's just a huge density of of players there, especially focused on industry. And so the industry players, they're going to be the ones gathering a lot of the PI and specializing in that. And that's why you see Curios there as number 1. Next on the list is Delve. Delve's a highly contested region right now. PIBC Alliance was there, the Chinese alliance, but recently Happy Bees, the Goon Swarm, as well as Terran Federation, TF, they've been fighting over Delve recently. And so a lot of players are right now focused on Delve as a contested area, and so you see a lot of PI gathered there. I'm surprised it's as high as it's at, mostly because if you have a lot of fighting going on, it's probably a really bad spot to be gathering PI in. It can be dangerous. So I'm surprised it's so high on the list compared to some of the other regions where these alliances are based out of. But that's why you see Delve way up there. There's a lot of contention right now in there, and a lot of players fighting over who's going to take control of Delve here in the next few months. Then for the top blue ones, since we got to Lone Trek, the high and low sec regions, you have Lone Trek, the Forge, and Domain, Metropolis, the Citadel. All of those besides Domain are all huddled around JITA, the main trade hub. And so a lot of players, if they don't feel like selling it at other markets and they just want to sell at JITA, where that's where most of the player base buys and sells at, you're just going to set up your PI around those systems. So that's why Lone Trek and all of those are so high on the list. Domain is up there as well. That's the Amar trade hub. And so those are the top high and low sec systems, which makes a lot of sense that around the major trade hubs is where you're going to get the most PI gathered. Going back to the nullsec regions, Veil of the Silent is the closest nullsec region to JITA, so that's why you have Veil of the Silent there. After Veil of the Silent, you have Delkin. Delkin is a good place to be gathering PI at because it's a nullsec region that has a ton of low security space, and the lower the security of the system, the higher multiplier you'll get with your output. So that's why you see so much mining there in Delkin, is there's just a lot of planets out there that have really good outputs. Cache is up next. That's where the Golden Horde's located. So kind of like Curios, you just have a lot of corporations all gathered in one spot with a lot of players. And so that's why it gets so far up there, because that's where the Golden Horde's at, all the way on the east side of the map. Esoteria, that's the main system for GenFed, the large alliance. So just like the others, you have Esoteria way up there because you have a lot of players there. Then you have Syndicate. Syndicate, just like we went over in the ore video, is in a really good spot close to a lot of the high-sec systems as well as the trade centers. So Syndicate, even though it's a very contested area, it's really close for a nullsec region with very low security. So that's why you see Syndicate up there. Fountain's where Terran Federation's located. So you have a lot of players in the same area. Fethi Bolus, that's where Death Phantom is located, another big alliance, and that's up there. And then that's when you start to fall off as it gradually just goes down the list. Now we'll take a look at the lower side of the planetary material chart for the regions. And you can see Cloud Ring and Fade are the two lowest nullsec regions for planetary material gathering. Cloud Ring, like we discussed in the ore video that I just put out for the month of October, Cloud Ring doesn't have really low security for it being a null region. So you don't get any real benefits for being out there that you wouldn't be able to find in low sec. So Cloud Ring down there is second to worst, and then Fade is right above Cloud Ring. While it does have better security, it's still pretty low. So that tells me not only is it a bad area because of the security, but there's also just a low population of players out there. This graph should give you a good idea of how many players are in each region, because planetary materials are restricted by player. Even though if they have more than one account, it's still a good way to get a general idea of where players are located by using planetary materials as the metric, because that's one thing that the devs don't give data on, is number of players in all the regions. But from this graph, you can kind of get an idea where players are located from the higher end to the lower end. Solitude and the Bleak Lands are the two worst areas to be gathering for the low and high sec regions, and they're just not in good areas. Solitude has plenty of nullsec regions right next to it, so anyone that's doing any type of gameplay in Solitude would be better just doing their planetary materials out in those nullsec regions and then bringing them back. The Bleak Lands is just in a really awkward spot. It's in the center of the map, but it's a lot of jumps to get to, and it's not really easily accessible to any of the ITCs, the trade centers. You can get to them, but there's no real benefit to gain, so it makes more sense for those players just to go out and mine their PI somewhere else besides the Bleak Lands. Thanks for watching my video. Make sure to subscribe if you want to receive notifications when I put out more content for EVE Echoes. I'll be doing additional monthly charts for October for things like market data, manufacturing totals, and kill mail totals, as well as continuing to update my planetary material and ore videos. Thank you to my Patreon subscribers, Drew, Steven, James, and Jameson, as well as all my Twitch subscribers on twitch.tv/JGeks. Thanks for watching this video, and hope to see you soon.